Hello, everybody. Let's hop into week two. What do we have going on this week? Well, this week is a really interesting week because we're going to talk about how our demographics, how our culture is changing here in the US. Of course, our cultural values, we always have considered ourselves a melting pot, but now we have values that have come in, and we look at this demographically and we see, particularly for Gen Z, Gen Next, also known as Z plus, whatever you want to call them, is, they have this tendency and propendency to want to be very sort of socially entrepreneurial, social marketers, and this green marketing, cause marketing, and all of those sort of things becomes very important for them. And particularly the diversity factor becomes very important for them when you're trying to market and sell different sorts of items. So we're going to jump into it. A couple of these I may skip over, but of course you always have the notes here as well to go back to, and you also have the book to support this week if you need to get a little bit more clarification and detail. I don't want to keep you too long on these lectures, so that you have an opportunity to go in and look at those things and read the chapter as well. Okay, so what is this idea of cultural value? We've talked about a little bit about culture, we've talked a little bit about value. What is the combination of the two of them together? What does that mean? So it's these are the sorts of things that start to meld into our daily lives. These are the things. It's very difficult to negotiate with someone when it's a part of what I call their value system. So if something is truly ingrained with them, it's something that is deep within them, that they have learned from a very young age. It is, or they have adopted at some point, and they feel very strongly about it. Oftentimes, we see this with religion. We see this with politics. We see this with sexual orientation. We see this with, there's other sorts of cultural things, that these are things that are in a part of someone's value system. Just by telling them that you disagree, or by giving them your side of a position, doesn't mean that they're going to change it. In fact, that's unlikely to happen. So cultural values are those types of values that have been formed because of our culture around us. And these can be incredibly difficult to persuade or change. It's oftentimes causes a lot of political and personal strife, if you will, because an individual who has been raised in a very specific context, it's very difficult to get them to see something different that you might believe is different. So if you're wanting something to go against a cultural value that perhaps they've learned as a part of a deeply or religious upbringing, that will be difficult to do. So we see these two things sort of melding together. When you're looking at the book, though, there's these 18 sort of values that they describe as being, important. And so we'll kind of touch on these a little bit. I'm not going to get too deep on these because I think that this is definitely something that you're able to look at in the book. But I want to talk about a couple of different things. This youth age value, we're seeing a very dramatic shift, say from boomers to Gen Z, or boomers to Gen Z plus, the Gen Next, if you will. So we see this huge shift. We're also seeing a shift towards masculine, feminine, and that's been happening for quite some time. So that's not a new shift, but it is a shift that continues to sort of evolve over time. And this individual collective, this idea that we're in this together, we're teams, we need to be a part of something. And that shift has resulted in from a lot of different things. If we think about generationally speaking, we saw boomers as a huge generation, right? We saw boomers as a very large generation. Then we saw Gen Z is quite a bit smaller. We have this hourglass effect, and then we popped back out and we saw millennials and Gen Z a lot bigger. But what has happened is that when you have fewer people that were able to do the job, or that idea of competition, you had to be more of a collective type of society in order to get it done. People had to wear a number of different hats, and it kind of created this era of collaboration, which prompted a lot of technological innovation as well. We saw the internet become very quickly adopted throughout the world, and at a rapid pace. So we kind of have to think through how those values are all interconnected with one another. Um, you know, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a strong performance emphasis, right? Now that we're back to this kind of larger generation that is in the workforce, millennials specifically, they're in the workforce. We have this idea of a strong performance emphasis. We jokingly say that the millennials were the generation where everyone got a trophy, everyone got a ribbon or a medal for participation, and that has lended itself quite a bit to this performance emphasis, right? We have these Gen X, we have these boomers who are like, okay, well, but how do we measure this? And so we kind of look at the ways that these sort of things have now affected our values and our cultures and how those are merging together. If we look at a few more here, this material, non-material, I think is very important from a marketing context. For a very, very long time, Americans were incredibly material creatures, if you will. And that was something that if you traveled abroad, you heard people say, we're materialistic, we are arrogant. And the arrogance doesn't come necessarily from really being arrogant, but they perceive us as being very confident. We tend to talk very quickly, make decisions very quickly. We actually tend to talk a little bit louder than some other cultures, and that's part of where they perceive that as somewhat arrogant. Whether that is or is not the case, obviously that's very dependent on the individual. But we're seeing, even though materialism is still important, we're seeing this shift towards the non-material, this idea that we want happiness. We're looking at other countries that are measuring their happiness not based on the kind of car they're driving or the type of brand that they're wearing, but on other sorts of attributes in life. We're starting to see these multi-generational families living together again because of this. This material is becoming very difficult for people to afford and balance in their lives. Let's see here. What is a couple of other things? Hard work and leisure. That dovetails quite nicely into the hard work and leisure. Leisure, that work-life balance has become something over the past decade that is incredibly important, not only to millennials and Gen Z, and then of course the very young, Gen Z plus, which are, they're going to be just in their teens, but it is something that all generations are beginning to adopt, and they want to see that balance a little bit better. We still remain very sort of strong, what we call an active orientation. We don't tend to be a passive society here in the United States. So anyway, take a look at the rest of those. Here's just one last set here. And there's a couple that I want to point out here. It's interesting when we talk about religious and secular beliefs and how those define cultural values, because what we have seen here in the United States, whether you agree or disagree, the numbers are what they are, is that we're seeing religion as a whole sort of, it's whittling down. We're starting to see fewer and fewer numbers, and that plays into some of these other values. And we are starting to see churches really financially struggle with the reduction in the number of young people who are attending these services and then wanting to tithe and keep those programs going. We're starting to see churches merge together. We've got sharing of locations. We see churches using schools and things like that. So this religious and secular, definitely something to keep in mind, because that has a kind of what we call like this wave effect on everything else. How people perceive religion and how they're attending religious services tends to have an effect on a lot of different things. How people treat one another, how they're spending their time and their money. And so definitely as a marketer, over the next couple of decades, keep that closely in mind and how that will affect how you're positioning and selling products. And then, of course, this idea of postponed gratification, immediate gratification, very, very interesting. Part of why people thought that the internet would never be strong as an e-commerce platform is because of this delayed gratification, right? We thought, oh, we're not going to want to wait days for something to come in the mail. Nobody wants to do that. I can go get it at the store and get it now. I love, that sense of immediate gratification. Well, we've now conditioned ourselves that this postponed gratification, it may be slightly delayed gratification, if you will, is what most people refer to it as. We've kind of gotten ourselves in that place where that's an okay situation. So, okay, let's see here. Let's jump into a couple of other things. You guys have done, work in week 2 on this self-oriented values. So what do we actually mean by self-oriented values? Well, we're turning toward a greater emphasis of some sort of, these sensual gratifications, these things where we might have tempered spending and things like that, but we really truly want to be happy. And that's just kind of let that sink in. There's really simplistic in nature, but we want ourselves to be happy. We want to work hard, but we want a balance that generations previously might not have had. They had to work hard to get where they were, and that stems from a long generation of individuals, even back to days where agriculture and farming was a predominant industry in the U.S. for most people, and they got up very early and they worked very late. This idea of hard work, but now in the technological era, there is this perceived idea that we can have it all, we can be balanced. So that's sort of an interesting piece of that. What about the environment? How has that been, affecting different things as well? We have, as particularly millennials, Gen Z, maybe some younger Gen X, are really in a place where they realize that the Earth's resources are finite, and having and protecting that has become of paramount importance to those people, and that has bled into a lot of your political discussions as well, because those constituents are driving those conversations. They're important conversations, but those are the conversations that you're starting to see, and you have started to see slowly emerge over the last couple of decades. What about this voluntary simplicity and this consumption? If you hop on 5 minutes on TikTok, you're going to see this idea of voluntary simplicity, right? I live with less. I'm doing more with less. I'm happier with less. These are all sorts of ways that people are kind of living with less. Now, that may be more of an extreme example, but certainly this idea that, this sort of emergence of things like it's okay to shop resale or thrift or all of these sort of things. At some point, that was strictly reserved for a population of individuals who financially could not do otherwise. But now it's kind of cool to thrift, right? It's kind of cool to show that you can reuse and that you can practice this idea of consumption, but you are mindful of what you're consuming. So that is this idea of voluntary simplicity and consumption. So we talked a little bit about green marketing already. This green marketing is sort of interesting. We've got a couple of things that, we might get into here a bit, is this greenwashing, that's making something feel more green than what it is. But what is green marketing? These are products that have a net positive impact on the environment, or they're supporting some type of environmental initiative. So that's in a nutshell what green marketing is. Perhaps they're also being produced in such a way that is incredibly sustainable. So that is green marketing. What do these green marketing strategies look like? Well, like we've said before, it may be that you're purchasing something that will benefit a green or a sustainable initiative, or your manufacturing processes are sustainable in some sort of way. What are these values that we talk about here for green marketing? Well, I don't want to get too much into that because this course is less about that. Just understand that particularly as younger generations, they're much more in tune with this, but we want to make sure that we are reducing the harmful effects that we have in waste disposal. I did my dissertation on the small electronic device recycling and their purchase. And it's really interesting to know that people on average will have 5 to 7, old discarded devices in their home. And you probably do as well. And that was quite a few years ago when I did my dissertation. But this idea of solid waste disposal, because it is so harmful to the environment because of the heavy metals that these technology pieces are used to, what we use to make these devices. Okay, our air and water pollution, a lot of that is kind of together because these technology devices will kind of leach into the land, and they create a lot of water pollution underground. Resource depletion, we've talked about that a million times. You hear that constantly on the news. What do we do on resource depletion? And then these chemical additives, particularly to our food. You see a lot of green marketing in food, and this discussion of what sort of additives we should have and how that is affecting us and our health and well-being. So what about enviropreneurial marketing? Well, that's kind of an interesting term, isn't it? This is just environmentally friendly marketing, right? We want to show that that we are a product that is we're green, we have a green process. We're marketing this to those types of consumers that are willing to pay a little bit more to have something that has been sustainably produced, has net carbon impact or net zero carbon impact, or is benefiting some sort of environmental initiative in some way. All right. So what's the conflict here? This is really sort of interesting. This idea that this reduce, reuse, recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle. We've all heard of this over and over and over again. But the challenge, of course, is businesses are capitalist and they want to drive the material nature that has subsisted for decades now. And this reusing, this idea of thrifting or having a longer shelf life and not having this throwaway disposable goods is really not in line with their overall goals for profitability and selling lots and lots of items. So that's kind of the conflict in a nutshell. What about cause-related marketing? Cause-related marketing, this is, we're selling something, we're Toms, if you will. That's a good example of cause-related marketing. We are selling something to benefit someone else. So anybody that is running some sort of a promotion where they're giving some of the proceeds back, or if they're the Tom's like 1-for-1 type program, these would be considered cause-related marketing. And that does work. What you have to worry about is though it becoming stale at some point, people taking it for granted, or if something happens and you're not able to deliver on that promise in a way that your consumers believe that you should. And that has gotten a couple of people in trouble. I mean, particularly Volkswagen. Volkswagen got a little bit of trouble on some of that, and that really can damage the brand quite significantly. All right. Why is cause-related marketing successful? Well, I mean, it allows people to feel like their purchase has some leverage, right? It has legs, if we will. We are able to purchase something and then make sure that we're doing good for the society. Now a lot of this cause marketing has turned into these retail sort of, do you want to add $1? Do you want to round up? Do you want to do like that? That is, it's effective, but it doesn't make the consumer feel as good. So you have to kind of weigh, exactly what you're asking your consumer to do something at the point of purchase. All right. So let's talk about these two sort of things, ascribed roles and achievement roles. All right. So these ascribed roles are, we have this individual, they have no control over these, right? The achievement is because I have actually done something to achieve it. And we're just going to keep it basically simple like that. In society, we just had, Pride Month. So one of the things that we think is that, this has become an incredibly large, as you've seen in your textbook, this is a very large market of individuals. This is a fast growing, they want to be recognized. They want to feel like they have been marginalized for quite some time and throughout the history. And they are having this moment of kind of clarity and emergence and acceptance. And this has been celebrated, and many, many brands will celebrate, particularly during Pride Month. They will celebrate this, and you will see a lot of this. So if this falls in line with your brand, this may be something to consider. You really have to consider where that falls in line. If you've had me for digital marketing, you'll see that kind of Venn. If you'll remember that Venn diagram, how we overlap and how some brands this would not work for and many brands this could work for. So it really depends on your bandwidth and how you're positioning your product or service. Okay, so I'm going to pop through that one pretty quickly because you can read more about that. What about gender-based marketing? Well, we've seen it for years with clothing, right? I mean, now things are becoming a little bit more gender fluid, but we still tend to see this. It's particularly with children's toys, we see this a lot. We see this sort of, aisle that is specifically being marketed to little girls, and these aisles that are specifically being marketed toward little boys. A lot of that is starting to merge. It's not quite as delineated as it was before, but we do see that quite a bit. We have a greater acceptance for boys with playing with female type toys, or historically female type toys, and then of course with little girls playing with historically male marketed toys. So that overlap is happening, and so that creates a broader audience as well. All right, what about this modern gender role orientation? It's really interesting. In the past, that has been a very perceived, very interesting, historically male, female, traditional male. Male assumes the role, the financial role of taking care of the family. Now, that is a very sort of early to part, yeah, 3/4 through of the 20th century, right? Now we're in the 21st century, late 20th century, into the 21st century here. We see this modern marriage where they share these responsibilities. Ever since really the 70s, we start seeing that glass ceiling, that feminism start to take place, and we start seeing this shared modern marriage where we have this duality of roles with two people. Right. We're also seeing a higher percentage of what we would call dinks, which is dual income, no kids. We see a lot of these shared relationships. And in fact, we're seeing a lot of these relationships where they're not married in the traditional sense of having a piece of paper, but they're cohabitating or they consider themselves partners. And that spans across all gender spectrums, whether that's male, female, or female, or anything else. So that you kind of think through what that modern situation looks like now. All right. In the past, our segmentation for the female consumer has really been based on a couple of different archetypes, which are quite interesting. And I'm gonna kind of look at these a little bit more closely here. This traditional housewife archetype, right? They're not employed. Their gender role orientation, they're content. They're staying at home. And certainly we still have that archetype, this trapped housewife. They're not employed, but they want to be in a modern gender role orientation, and they feel like they just struggle to get out, and they're not happy with that. The trapped working wife, the working wife who would actually rather be at home as a traditional housewife. And then the career working woman, the woman who wants to be working, she is working, maybe she has the opportunity to stay at home, but that's not where she's at. So we have these four sort of archetypes, and that's historically how women have been grouped. But there's the changing role of women is out there, of course, right? I will talk quite a bit about in our meeting, and in a lot of my other classes, I'll talk about the example of Sears department stores and how they were a very historically male-dominated organization. Then they tried to very quickly shift to a female demographic and a female consumer. They lost the males. They tried to shift too quickly. They lost the females by trying to sell them what they considered more female idealistic type of products like clothes, shoes, and things like that. Whereas we look at Lowe's and Home Depot, and they've been able to make that shift to females without any real help at all, because females enjoy home improvement and decorating and painting and all of these sort of things, and appliance purchasing. Sears was unable to realize that was a direction that was okay for females, and that you don't have to sell them female-oriented products. Okay, so now we're into chapter 4 here. That was chapter 3. This is chapter 4. Some of the things that we're going to talk about is some of our demographics here. Let's talk about how our demographics are changing. What are demographics? First off, let's kind of get a baseline of what that is. That's age, that's income, that's education, that's occupational makeup, right? They are not static, they're continuously changing. Our growth rate is fairly moderate, and some cultures within and some races within that culture are U.S. demographic are growing faster than others, and some are declining. So that don't get too caught up in that. Let's see here. Let's look at our population growth. Here's the kind of interesting things. If we don't have a continuous growth of population, a number of these sort of industries are going to face some sort of declining demand, right? They're just not going to they're not going to continue to increase their demand. And this could cause a increased diversification. Firms are coming together, a more highly competitive environment, which could be very good, because these sort of competitive environments really encourage strong innovation to make sure that we can adapt to the areas that don't have that type of coverage anymore. So it's sort of an interesting thing. Also, consumption is reduced with fewer people. Okay, what does the occupational structure look like here in the U.S.? Well, as we said earlier, women are increasing their participation in the labor force. That has been steadily increasing since the 70s. So that has not shifted at all. It's really sort of we see this white collar technical away from blue collar because so many more jobs have become automated. Some of our blue collar jobs have actually turned into a more technically oriented type of job. What about income trends in the United States? So this is kind of interesting. We know that in 2008 we had the housing bust, we had a recession, we had slow growth, but what we have seen is that this sort of age distribution, where I talked about the boomers and then the Gen X, we have this large hourglass sort of shaped demographic in terms of age cohorts. That's what we call boomers, Gen X. Those are cohorts. So how does this age distribution affect this? Well, our boomers it'll be a little top heavy, right? Because we have that smaller little dip in the middle there. It's going to be somewhat top heavy. So we've got a larger percentage of the people who are older with a higher percentage of the disposable income. That creates a lot of challenge. And so we see a lot of items very much marketed toward this 50 plus audience because of the amount of disposable income they have. Younger individuals, things are more expensive. Home ownership, car ownership, all these sort of things are more expensive. So they don't have, the disposable income because most of their disposable income is going toward necessities. So we look at that top heavy idea of disposable income. What about these subjective discretionary incomes? This is how much money people feel like they have for these non-essential purchases, right? If I want an expensive handbag, if I want a motorcycle that is not my primary mode of transportation, if I want a vacation, that is what a discretionary income is. Okay, age distribution in the United States. As we can see here, we're starting to see a smaller number of people who are under this sort of 35. We're starting to see, that kind of dispersed. And then we start to see this 50, 45, 40. We have this boomers, this sort of, and now, individuals that are really pocketed. There's also growth between 30 and 39, but it's to a lesser degree. All right, what about cognitive age? So I love this concept. I think it's very interesting. So one of the things the best way to describe this is 40 is the new 30, right? That's this idea of how does one identify, right? What do I feel like I am and how do I behave like I am? If you look back in the past at what a 50-year-old would look and behave like, say in 1960 or 1970, and then you do it again for 80, 90, 2000, 210, 220, you'll see a huge shift. And those people just seem younger. Like they act younger, they think of themselves as younger. Whereas in the past, this idea, oh my gosh, 50, my life is almost over. Now people are saying my life is just beginning. So this cognitive age is a really psychologically interesting sort of concept, and one which is fascinating for marketers for sure. Okay. What about this idea of generations? Like I said before, when we call them generations, the boomers, the silent generation, the boomers, the Gen X, the Gen Y or millennials, that you can call them either one. Gen Z, then you've got Generation Alpha or Z plus. So all these sort of groups, those are called cohorts. Cohort analysis is the ability of kind of describing their interdependencies or their differences. And I've spent a lot of time in my career doing that. It's very, very fascinating. These age cohorts, is a generation, these are all people who have experienced very common social, political, historical, or economic types of things. For example, an older millennial to a younger boomer would have experienced distinctly the Challenger explosion while watching it on television in their classroom. If you shift that down a little bit and you think about 2001 and how we have the millennials and how 9/11 really dramatically affected them and where they were at in these school age years, these formative years, and how that affected them. So a lot of these pivotal events affect these cohorts, and that's a shared event because of them. So we have this pre-depression generation. These are individuals born before 1930s. To be honest, this is not a large consumer segment because these individuals are nearing the century mark. And unfortunately, their care tends to be more palliative or tends to be more healthcare related and things like that. So we don't see a lot that is geared specifically towards this generation, or you would not. All right, so the Depression generation, this is 30 to 45, similar types of situation here. Given their age, we see that these individuals, this says soon or will retire, but I disagree with the book on this. These folks have retired. And the more healthy and fit one of them, the one with that high cognitive age, or, they feel better about their age, and they were like, oh, I'm 80, but I feel 60. They're still out doing and spending money and doing things. But these were savers by nature because of the depression, and but they are dealing with the physical effects of aging. All right, baby boomers. This is these are the folks who had a dramatic increase. These folks were born because of the dramatic increase in births after World War II. People came back home and, oh my gosh, I'm happy to see you. There's about 75 million of them. It's a huge cohort. The challenge is because of the fewer number of Gen X, these baby boomers have had to work longer, maybe than previous generation. They also needed to save. Things got more expensive, but they're healthy, they're fit. We have a huge marketing segment that creates campaigns geared specifically towards boomers. All right, Gen X. Gen X is 65 to 76. Sometimes you'll see 64 to 77, 66. It shuffles. So if you're a year in or out, you're somewhere there. It's a smaller number. As I said, this generation is quite a bit smaller. They're considered this sort of apathetic generation, right? They tend to be highly educated. There were fewer of them, so they had, more opportunities to attend higher education. Their parents did well enough that they were able to do that. They are very entrepreneurial, right? And they're high in technology use. This group, despite all other groups' perception of their understanding of technology, this group has probably one of the best understandings because they knew life before and they know life after, and the context and the ability to see that duality and see how, things can be done makes them incredibly innovative. When you get down to groups that are digital natives and they've never known a world without the internet or all this technology, they have difficulty figuring out what would have driven those innovations because of the way things were done before. So kind of think through that. That Gen X understanding that the need for a cell phone was incredibly important because people were stopping and using payphones, and it just was not as convenient, if you will, or safe. So they're driving a lot of that innovation still to this day, although millennials are driving more of it. All right. Gen Y, like I said before, you can call them Gen Y, you can call them millennials. They're both interchangeable. 79 million people. So we got 75 million boomers. We got about 55 million, Gen X. We didn't say that in the last slide, but that's about where it is. And you get 79 million boomers. So you can really see this hourglass start to take effect here. This is the first generation to grow up with lots of opportunities for women, right? We see the Gen X were latchkey kids. Their parents started working. They had to come in and figure it out for themselves. This group was bubble wrapped, right? They came in and parents were very concerned about making sure that they had that they were happy, that they had, that they were motivated, that they were safe, that they were secure, that they were all of these sort of things, kind of to define very quickly what millennials are about. Okay, but they have grown up with divorce as a norm in their household. They have grown up and been confronted, as I said earlier, with 9/11, terrorism, homelessness, all of these sort of political and sociocultural things that we see around us today. Part of the reason that they were so heavily protected. What about our Gen Zs? These are 1995 to 2009. They are digital natives. They have never known a world that did not have the internet. that never known a world, even though 95 was a bit early by the time they got to a place where they can use it. They are the digital natives. They don't know a time before computers, the internet, and cell phones. They are dealing with a really global shift. The world got smaller with this the digital technology, and so now they're very interconnected with people across the world. That's kind of cultural melting pots taking place because they can be on a game with somebody in Pakistan at at 8 p.m. and the next morning going to school with somebody down the street and come back home and they're chit-chatting with somebody on TikTok from the UK at 6 o'clock. So it's just a really interesting sort of thing. Diversity as a result is hugely important to this group. So do not count that out when you are marketing to this type of group. Okay, Gen Alpha, they're young, right? They're 2010, they're babies. They're about the oldest ones are, just now becoming teenagers. These are the children of millennials. So you have to think about how they were shaped and bubble wrapped and, kind of held together. But they're also very, very tech savvy because millennials got in on this technology. And so they're growing up immediately being very, very tech savvy. In fact, your younger 13-year-old Gen Alpha can probably set up your router faster than your parent kid in these sort of environments. Over 10 billion is spent annually on these folks, on these kiddos, and they also are buying their own purchases at an earlier age. I mean, they could just walk up and ask Alexa to buy something. We've all seen those videos, of course. Okay, what about social stratification? What is it and what does it do? Well, a social class system, this is this hierarchical division, right? It creates, this is how we do this. We see this a lot. If we think of it in an extreme form, if you visited a city like New York City, you see a huge bit of social stratification, right? The wealthy, then all the way down to the people who are sleeping on the street, right? It's a huge social class system. Some cities in the Midwest, you don't quite see it socially stratified to that extreme, but you do in much larger cities that are very expensive, where the wealthy seem to have all of it, have all the best housing, have all the best entertainment and food and all of that, and then the very, very poor very much struggle. So this kind of shift that takes place. Okay, so what is this idea of status crystallization? This is the consistency of individuals and families. So this high income and high educational level, this idea that they're, this sort of rich keep getting richer, rich keep getting richer. That's probably the better way to think about that. What's a social class system? This is our society that has grouped out, right? We tend to think of very specific classes of people as having more than others, the haves and the have-nots, right? This is something that has geared a lot of political conversation over the past 5 years. How can we break that down and provide more opportunities for people who traditionally have not been able to have them? So this is a part of that social class system and how that gets broken down and how opportunities get spread more consistently across all people so that they have opportunities that everyone has. And it's not just simply based on the fact that I have money, therefore I have more opportunity. Okay, status continua. These are in our society, this is how we judge people, our achievement related continua, right? Well, she did this and then she got a job and then she got a promotion and then she went back to law school and then she did this, and this sort of stair-stepping ladder type of effect. All right. Let's just ask, what are the social classes in America? There's 7 of them that Coleman and Rainwater use that I think are very relevant. This is what you'll find in your textbook as well. And we've got that upper, right? That upper 1%, the very elite wealthy, the lower upper, okay? We've got the upper middle working class, upper lower, and lower. So these are kind of the stratification here that we have in America. What about this status crystallization? We talked a little bit about this. We have what's interesting. We see this moderate because we see a lot of people who maybe have high incomes and yet are high education and low incomes, or vice versa, right? Maybe they don't have as much education, they have a high income because they're very entrepreneurial. So that's kind of something to keep in mind, and how that works here in the United States versus other places where it is very sort of high education, high income. In the United States, there can be exceptions to that particular rule. Okay, let's talk about the upper class, right? We saw these folks here in a private plane. This is inherited wealth, oftentimes highly educated, but they may not work, right? And maybe they're trust fund babies, as we call it. They have, all sorts of things. They do international travel. They are in politics. They just are the elite in terms of a financial status. What about lower upper? These are very high incomes, but we often see this through maybe celebrity entertainment, sports, entrepreneurship. They can really kind of engage in what I like to consider conspicuous consumption, right? They're very flashy, right? When they say old money, you don't know it. New money, you do. This is your new money right here. These are the people who are going to probably be driving your Ferraris loudly down the street. These are our lower upper class. Okay. Upper middle class. Upper middle these are comprised of families that have achieved a specific social position. They are working families, right? But they're working in white collar type of jobs. So this is what we oftentimes see, and it will be managers and above, managers, directors above. We'll see this upper middle class. Middle class, you do have white collar workers in here, office workers, school teachers, and lower level managers. And then you have higher paid blue collar workers, people who are in a supervisory type of role. All right. They're more modest homes, and they have to balance this conspicuous consumption. They can't just go nutty with it. They're going to probably save up for that Disney vacation over the course of a few years, whereas your upper middle might just decide to go annually, do something like that. So you kind of think about the division there. Working class, who's our working class? This is some sort of manual labor, either skilled or unskilled. We see a larger group of individuals at this level that did not complete high school, or perhaps just has a GED. Job security is low. There's a lot of turnover. So this is who our working class is. And what about the lower class? Lower income, lower education, oftentimes no jobs, and they come from families that's a very cyclical sort of system, and they come from similar lower class, very poor, the least educated. They're rarely employed. They're on social welfare. We would see even the most extreme, we would see homeless people in this lower class as well. Okay, we're getting close here to the end. How do we measure social class? Well, we measured in a couple of different ways. You have this multi-item index, or a single item index. Okay, so what is a multi-item index? These are a multitude of things that we would look at as an algorithm, versus a single, which would be more like just looking strictly at an income level. Okay, so multi would be a multitude of different factors: housing, income, housing, income, education, those sort of things. A multi-factor index, or a single index, which would be just simply income. Okay. What about social class and marketing strategies? Well, of course, it's a big deal. You're not going to market a Rolex to a lower or an upper lower middle class. They don't have that sort of conspicuous consumption and that discretionary disposable income like some of those others might. You might drop down and try to get some of those upper middles to save for it. Maybe that is a self-esteem, a luxury item that they strive for, but more of your people are going to be higher than that if they're purchasing it without a lot of high involvement, right? That high involvement, I got to think about it, I got to plan, I got to do a lot of work towards it and research and all of that. Low involvement, those very top echelons are going to be low involvement. For something like a Rolex, they may like, oh, I need a new watch, and go buy one. So kind of think about how that would, those two groups. What about this sort of idea of ethical marketing in lower classes? Well, it's quite interesting. So there's this ongoing debate of how this should be done, right? And taking advantage of the vulnerabilities of individuals so that you don't force them to spend more of the discretionary of disposable income than they actually should do, because they have this idea that it's become a need. So this sort of these cohorts drive this, and this social stratification drives that as well. All right, there's so much on this topic. This could be a whole course. It could be just eons of information are out there about this. I hope that if you've enjoyed this, one of my favorite things to talk about is generational marketing. And this is really kind of there's so many different options out there, but you shoot me an email if you have any questions, or if you just want to chat some more about it, I'd be happy to. And I will see you on the other side.